Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our November Lunchtime Lecture. We're so glad you could join us today. Before we begin, we'd like to extend a warm thank you to our sponsor, UT's Extended Campus, whose support helps make these engaging and thought-provoking sessions possible. Today's lecture is titled, What Our Spaces Reveal About Us, and we're thrilled to be joined by Dr. Samuel D. Gosling, Distinguished Teaching Professor in the Department of Psychology at UT Austin. Dr. Gosling's research explores the fascinating ways in which our environments, whether it's a bedroom, a neighborhood, or an entire city, reflect and shape who we are. He'll guide us through how people select and manipulate their spaces to express attitudes, values, traits, and emotions, offering insights into the psychology of physical space and what it reveals about personality. Dr. Gosling is a widely recognized scholar and author of Snoop, What Your Stuff Says About You. His work has earned numerous accolades, including the APA's Distinguished Scientific Award for Early Career Contribution and recognition as one of the most highly cited scientists in the world. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sam Gosling.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the work we have been doing over the past couple of decades, looking at how people connect to their spaces. We'll be taking questions at the end, but be ready for the Q&A because there's going to be one point where I will be asking you to make a guess about some of the findings. So let's get started oh, is that not working? There we go. I don't know. Next slide. There we go. But like talking about some of my collaborators. So I won't be naming the collaborators, but just understand that everything that I'm talking about today has been done in collaboration with many others who I won't be calling out by person as we go through. But just assume this is all collective work. I am working with and standing on the shoulders of these other great people. So let's get stuck in. All right, so a lot of the work I have done has been looking at dorm rooms. And here are two dorm rooms from the University of Texas. Some of you may recognize the Jester dorms setup. And these are two rooms that I went into after the semester had started. These students didn't know I was coming. I just essentially knocked on the door and said, can I take a photo of your room? So none of this is prepared. That photo on the right, those shoes are really where they are, and you can see it was taken quite a while ago by the size of the computers. But what's interesting about these, right, is if I had gone in the day before semester had started and taken photos from these exact same locations, you would have thought that I was showing you the same photograph twice. These rooms are identical. Yet just a few weeks into the semester, they look very different. And they look different because, and I'm using the word because here, I'm getting causal, which we scientists are very hesitant to do. We're very cautious about using the word cause because we often don't know if there's causal information. But here we can be bold, right? We can say these places are different because of the person who is living in there, because of things they have done. And so what I want to do today is talk a little bit about how we connect to our spaces, how our spaces reflect who we are, and how that might be useful in various capacities. So, so here is another. So this is just an office space, right? And I encourage you as we're going through this, really, take a moment to think about your own spaces. Think about your office space, your living space, various other spaces that you occupy, and how they are and what they may say about you. Because virtually all the processes I'm talking about today, they're so automatic that we probably don't even notice they're happening until we direct our attention to them. So here you see somebody's office space and you see things they have put up on their desk and on the windowsill, on the wall, and so on. They have done something to these spaces, and that reflects a little bit who they are. Now, of course, personality shows up in all kinds of places, and they vary in terms of how public they are. So perhaps our language style, our location, our nationality, our email signature, our appearance, those things are very public. Our dreams, our thoughts, our underwear, passwords are more private. And then we have more control over some of these other things. We have lots of control over our passwords and our answer machine message, less so our dreams and our nationality and so on. And so there are many different ways in which personality can be expressed, some deliberately on these high control ends, some inadvertently perhaps in other areas. And why would you want to know about this sort of matrix? Well, one way you might want to know about it is if so you feel somebody's maybe trying to create a false impression. So if you go to and you see a distinction between the impression they give based on their public material versus the impression they give based on the material they believe to be private, is there a discrepancy? That should suggest perhaps that somebody's trying to create some kind of false impression. Now, we think there are essentially three broad processes connecting individuals to the places in which they dwell. Here's another angle of that office I showed you before. The first is what I call identity claims. So identity claims are deliberate statements that we broadcast to others about who we are. We want to tell people about our attitudes, our values, our accolades. We want them to know who we are. And so you see here on the back wall, you see this person's various awards and qualifications, whatever those things are. And those, to me, suggest identity claims because of their placement, right? They're behind where the person is sitting. They're not for the person to sit at every moment and enjoy and think about themselves. They're directed to other people who might come into this office to saying, hey, look, here is what I have done, what I have accomplished, my qualifications, and very appropriate too. You may want, especially in a work context, you may want people to know about what you have accomplished, that you are qualified to be doing the job that you are doing there. So identity statements, deliberate statements we say to others about who we are. You also find these in other contexts. So I've looked at student dorm rooms, as I've said in some of my work. And here you see the outside door of one of the dorm rooms that we were looking at. Now, one of the things, to think about here is, look, these are on the outside of the door. So they're not things that the occupant themselves is looking at. These are things that other people, so before you've even crossed the threshold to the room, you're already getting a sense of who this person is. Now, I think when you first hear, well, these people are deliberately giving you impressions, there's a very reasonable tendency to think this person is trying to give me a false impression, maybe to convey them, put themselves in a positive light. Well, that of course is possible, but there are a number of reasons why that may be more difficult to accomplish than one might think. And more importantly, there's some research coming also here from the University of Texas by Bill Swan, self-verification theory that's called, which shows that generally, actually, people want to be seen as they see themselves. They're not trying to be seen in a positive light. They are trying to be seen in the way that they see themselves, because when you feel known, if I am having a conversation with you and I feel you understand who I am, then that's much better that way. It makes me more confident and more comfortable in our interactions to think you understand who I am. So those are essentially this broad process: identity claims, deliberate statements we make about who we are. Another way that we affect our environment is through what I call thought and feeling regulators. So thought and feeling regulators are things we do to the space around us to make us think about certain things, to make us feel certain ways. Now, probably one of the most common ways we do that is with music. So here you see somebody listening to headphones, right? They are trying to affect their moods. And that, think about yourselves, right? You probably have a wide variety of music that you like, but you choose to listen to different things at different times. After, a stressful day at work, you may want to listen to something kind of relaxing before you go on out on a night on the town for a live. You want something more lively and something that's going to kind of make you wake up and be excited for going out. Before you go to the gym, you choose your beast mode playlist. So you're choosing these things. And we do the same things with our physical spaces. We may affect our spaces to affect our thoughts and feelings. So here is yet another shot of that office I showed you earlier. And here you see around the person's desk a bunch of photos. There's their kid and various other photos of reminders of special times and places and people, right? These are essentially not there for the benefit of others. They're not identity claims for other people's benefit. They're for the occupant's benefit in terms of affecting how they think and how they feel. Some researchers have referred to these kinds of things as social snacks. So, you're just as you might get hungry if you haven't had food for a while and you snack on some peanuts or something. If you're missing your baby, you may want to look up at the photo of your kid, and that serves a psychological snack in a way, a social snack. Almost certainly, virtually everybody here on the background of their phone has something that is a reminder of a good, happy place, a happy time, a happy person, a happy moment, something that went on. It's a reminder that we look at to try to affect our feelings. So we see these in people's spaces too. So here you see two offices where one of these is an extrovert, one of these is an introvert. You can probably guess which one. What do we know about extroverts? We know they get their energy from people, from having people around them. They even, they like to be around, they get energy from people, like to be around people. In terms of music, they even, compared to introverts, prefer music with voices in. So what do we see on this left photo? We see, if you look along the bottom, you see pictures of people, 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 people. They run out of space. You look along the top of the filing cabinet, there are more people there too. What about the person on the right? There's, the closest, there's a tree there, and there's a duck, right? So these are very different. If you look at the one on the right, that is really saying essentially down, regulate, calm down. There is no sense of people in that one. So I've talked about two of these processes, right? We've talked about identity claims, deliberate things we say to others, thought and feeling regulators, ways we affect our space to affect our thoughts and our feelings. But some of the things we do to our space are inadvertent. That's what I call behavioral residue. So that's the idea, is that we engage in many activities in our daily life, and a subset of those activities leave a material trace in their wake. So what are the books we have read? What is the state of the books? Have they been marked? How are they organized? So just looking at somebody's bookshelf, you can begin to get a sense of some of their behavioral residue. Here was one of the dorm rooms we looked at, right? This is residue. How does a space get to be like this versus a very neat space like the one we were looking at the beginning of this talk? Well, the difference is in their activities, right? This is residue of essentially not engaging in tidying up behavior. Also, of course, shows up in offices. So look, this on the right, you can see it was the introvert I was showing you before, one of my co-authors, Samin Vazir. And you see, look, on the left, you see the chaos of the desk. That's essentially what my desk looks like too. It's essentially, you look at something and then you kind of get bored, or you're done looking at it and you put it down. And these things just kind of, the sediment of various things slowly builds up, reflecting. So the residue here is reflecting that behavior. Whereas the photo on the left, look at that. The person has all the pens in the pen holder, the staplers in the right place, the backup staplers on top of the pad. And the desk is completely clear here. So you see here that essentially, even in this office space, the different personalities, the different activities that they engage in are reflected in the spaces that they occupy during the workday. So what did we do for our first study? I'm going to tell you about a whole bunch of studies. I'm going to tell you the first study quite quickly. I mean, quite not so quickly, in more detail. And then the later studies, I will be telling you more quickly, because they all essentially have the same design. So what we do is we choose some kind of target. So the first study we're talking about is going to be people's dorm rooms or their bedrooms, student dorm rooms mainly. And what we do is we have a team of researchers, and you see some here. They go around that space. They don't know who's there. They don't know anything about the person. All they've done is walked into the space with their survey, with their pads there. And what they're doing is they are trying to fill out a personality questionnaire of the person who lives in that space. And then what we do is we compare that personality impression with what the occupant themselves says about them and what two of their friends say about the occupant. Because, of course, we know there are in some cases, we may be a little bit deluded about ourselves. In some cases, if I want to know you, the best thing I could do is ask you, but also ask people who you've known for a long time and like take a combination of those. And then I'll have a pretty good sense of what your personality is. And then, of course, we'd send around another team looking at all of the various different items in that space. Is it light? Is it dark? Is it, is it decorated? Is it messy? Is there clocks? Are they on time? Is there trash? Is it full? Is it empty? Writing down all of these details too. And that way we can see what elements of the space are associated both with what people think you're like, use what these people in the photo would say, and also how these elements of the space are associated with what you're really like, because of course those things could be different. So these people are going into um, one space and they're making judgments about the occupants on the basis of the big five personality dimensions. Now, many of you will probably have heard of the big five. So this is essentially the most widely used and well accepted system for understanding personality uh, um, traits. So probably many of you have heard of the MBTI or the Myers-Briggs. So the Myers-Briggs was, a very good system for understanding personality, but it was really, developed by people who weren't real scientists. They were very thoughtful, intuitive people. So you can think of the Big Five essentially as what, the Myers-Briggs would be look like if it was based on a very large and substantial amount of rigorous research. And what this says it doesn't put you into types. It says there are five broad dimensions of personality, and we all have a score on all of them. So we're not one type or another. Everybody has a score on all of these, and you can sort of think what you might be. And sometimes it's called the ocean model because openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, that spells the word ocean when arranged like that. So, so think about where you stand on these traits. So openness, and it should be noted that they are all very broad traits. So they capture many different domains. These labels for the big five are short labels for very, very broad dimensions of personality. So what are these things? I sometimes call the openness dimension the Leonardo factor because it's essentially, if you think about Leonardo, he was, the classic Renaissance man. He was an artist, a biologist, an inventor, he had many different interests, was curious and so on. So people high on openness to experience, to them, the unknown is interesting. They are curious, they are creative, they have a lot of imagination, they tend to be high on intellect. They like to think about and try new things. Whereas people low on the openness dimension, they tend to be more conventional, more traditional, more conventional. More concrete. I said conventional, more concrete. If the unknown to them is disconcerting. One kind of way you can think about, are you high or low on openness, is when you go to a restaurant and you get the menu. Do you look at the menu and do you say, oh, what's that? I've never heard of that thing. I don't know what it is. I'll have it, please. If that's you, then you're high on openness. If you go into the restaurant and you say, don't show me the menu, I'm going to have the spaghetti because I know what I like and I like what I know and I like spaghetti, then you're probably on the lower end of the openness scale. And I should say, neither high nor low is better. Than the others. It really depends. It's really what determines whether it's good is whether it fits with your environment. So the next dimension is what I call conscientiousness. So this is really what you can think of kind of the frontal lobe functions. This is the stuff that humans have and most other animals don't. So these are people who think before they act. They are not impulsive. They're self-disciplined. They don't run out of supplies. They're orderly. They're organized. They're punctual versus people on the low end of the scale who are more chaotic, They run out of supplies. They forget about things. If you're going to meet with them, you have learned to tell them that the movie you're going for actually starts earlier than it really does if you want them to show up on time. Extroversion, we talked about this a little bit. Extroversion is quite close to kind of how we think about that in our ordinary everyday language. These are people who are outgoing. They tend to be cheerful. They tend to be a little more dominant. They tend to be more active. One way you can think about extroversion, as I said before, is sort of how they feel about do they get energy from people or are they drained from people? So even introverts can learn and often must learn to behave in an extroverted way. An introvert can go to a party, but they won't feel the same way about it. One of the ways to know if you're an extrovert or an introvert truly is after you just imagine you've just been to a big social event. How do you feel afterwards? If you are an extrovert, you feel, all right, let's go. That was fun. My batteries are charged. Where's the next party? Whereas if you're an introvert, you feel exhausted. You probably go lock yourself in the bathroom and you need to just kind of recover from all of that stimulation for all. That means you're probably introverted. Agreeableness. So these are people who are warm, they're kind, they're trusting, they're trustworthy, they are cooperative, versus people on the low end of the pole who are going to be more openly critical, they're going to be direct, they're not going to try to protect your feelings. Um, Neuroticism is a rather unfortunate term, but really what it means is a kind of a susceptibility and a sensitivity to what might go wrong. So these people tend to be more anxious. They tend to be more moody and depressed. And they tend to be, they kind of yeah, it's a sensitivity to what might go wrong. You know, they hear a door slam and they're kind of monitoring it. Whereas somebody low on neuroticism, what's known as emotional stability, they're kind of more calm, more stable, more easygoing. They don't even notice the door slamming in the distance. So keep these personality dimensions in mind because all of the studies that I've done here, they all use these big five dimensions. So again, we're going to do a little test here of your guesses. And what I'd like you to know, okay. I forgot to talk about this slide. Yeah, this is just the team going around collecting the evidence of what is in the spaces themselves. And here's the team going around the offices too. So let's go back to some bedrooms or dorm rooms. Um, so what I'm going to ask you to guess is which of the big five dimensions, and I'll show them to you again in just a second, do you think is most easily judged on the basis of people's living spaces? And by easily judged, I mean most accurately judged. So remember what we're doing is we're taking judges who know nothing about you. All they've seen is your living space. How well does their impressions agree with what you say about yourself and your good friends say about you? Okay. And I'm not asking you, I'm just showing you these two rooms as examples of what rooms look like. So I'm not asking you to compare these two rooms specifically. I'm just kind of giving you a sense of what people's dorm rooms look like. So, um, so what I want you to do is think which of the big five dimensions, and I'm going to show them to you now, which of the big five dimensions do you think is most accurately judged? And one is much more accurately judged than others, so I can give you that warning. Which is most accurately judged on the basis of snooping around somebody's living space? And please type your answer into the Q&A, and Summer is going to be there to summarize the various answers. So please put into the Q&A your answers. Is it openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, or neuroticism? I can see the numbers flooding in here. Very great. So keep on. So which do you think is most accurately judged?
Overwhelmingly, all of the guesses so far
Yeah.
are conscientiousness, although my guess is neuroticism.
All
That's
right. Okay. So you'd say like 90% we've got conscientiousness and
yes,
like 2% neuroticism.
yes.
All right. Well, you guys did very well. So 90% of you were right in guessing conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is indeed very accurately judged on the basis of snooping around people's spaces, but it's not the most accurately judged, not by far. The most accurately judged personality trait from snooping around people's spaces by far is openness to experience. Those people who have high versus low on openness is very accurately judged. Those people these people, they tend to have original art. They tend to have evidence of a variety of interests, a variety of books, a variety of music, a variety of magazines, a variety of things on the walls. They're interested in all kinds of different things. They'll have evidence of interests in different cultures and different ideas. They have books on poetry, on art. They will have original art. Those are the sorts of things they will have in their spaces. And those now that you can also, it turns out, judge all of these traits a bit. You can also neuroticism, extroversion, agreeableness. You can also judge much better than chance, but conscientiousness and openness are the two most strongly judged personality dimensions. So we also did this study, as I mentioned, in offices. So here I'm showing you this picture of offices. I think it's quite interesting because it shows you that, again, a cubicle is similar in the sense that it doesn't offer much. Cubicles look pretty similar until you have the evidence of somebody there. So for this study, we had people look at their offices and then did the same thing. We judged their big five and then compared it with what the person said about themselves. We also looked at websites. This was a long time ago. This study was done before really the advent of social media, where people would create websites. We had people look at their websites, and then we saved the websites, and then we had the website owners tell us what these people, the owners, what they thought they were like, and compared the impressions. So here you see some of the websites. I'm just giving you a sense of what they're like and the kinds of information you can find on them. And you can see they're quite different. Here, this person's got their movie preferences. They're showing their schedule. They have some poetry. This person has their mood diary, some pictures of their cat, some identity claims down on the left, and a picture of their office. This one even has a rather unflattering, or maybe it's unflattering photo of what they look like. So we did the study of that. Can you judge people based on their websites? And then, of course, social media came along and we had people judging people. Well, what about your social media profiles? Can people judge you on the basis of your social media profile? Can they judge you accurately? Are you conveying a accurate impression of yourself based on your social media profile? We did the same thing, had people judge the profile, and then we compared that to what the person and their friends really said about them. This is another study I want to show you. And I should be very clear that this isn't a study done by me. It's a study done by Tal Yarkoni, a brilliant scientist. But it's interesting. I like because it shows you, how broadly our personality shows up in spaces. So this is a study of blogs. What Tal Yarkoni did is he scraped people's blogs from the internet. And then he gave them personality surveys and just correlated the frequency with which they used different words and saw which word frequencies were associated with different personality traits. And I think it's a really interesting study because the words people use really does reflect kind of how we understand the personality traits. Let me show you some of the results. So do you remember neuroticism? Neuroticism was this dimension of, this of sensitivity to what can go wrong. Well, what is this person talking about in their blogs? What words are they using? They were using words like awful, worse, depressing, terrible, stressful, annoying, ashamed. Okay? Whereas think about extroverted, right? These are the people who like to go out and socialize and have fun. They're talking about bars, restaurants, dancing, Miami, shots, girls, glorious, those sorts of things. Okay, so they're talking about social activities a lot in their blogs. What about openness, right? Openness, these are the people who are curious, they're thoughtful, they're intellectual. They're talking about folk, poetry, art, a narrative, culture, those literature, those sorts of things are the things they're talking about. Agreeableness, right? These are the people who are kind and trusting and warm. In their blogs, they talk about things wonderful, together, visiting, mourning, Spring, you can see porn there, but it's a negative correlation. So they're not mentioning porn. Beautiful. Share. So they are glad. What about conscientious, right? These are the people, right, who are the task-oriented people. If what I love about this actually set of words is, look, if there was ever a single word that kind of summed up a dimension, I think it's this word completed for conscientiousness. What does that mean? That means you had your tasks for the day, you went through the day, you did your tasks, and you went home and you wrote a blog about it. So, when I see this dimension, I think of this guy on the left. You can almost see him at the end of the day right there saying, completed. I am done with whatever it is I had to do. What about other domains? Music preferences. Here we did a study. If you ask especially people in their late teens and 20s, you ask them, what is the best way to learn about other people? The thing they talk about most is music. So in this study, we asked people to tell us, give us your top 10 all-time songs. We saved those songs and we played them to someone, and we asked somebody else, okay, listen to these songs and tell us what you think this person's like. Give us your big five scores for this person. And then, of course, we asked the real person what their big five was like and compared what the people thought with what they're really like. And just looking at these two different top tens, you really do get a sense of different people, I think. What are other ways we might convey our impressions? Well, the others are just kind of the activities we do, the things we do. So this was a study done many years ago where people essentially carried around just a little recorder on their hips. There's now a current version, of course, which is smartphone based, and it has a microphone. And that microphone comes on for 30 seconds and then goes off for 2 minutes, and then comes on for 30 seconds and goes off for 2 minutes. So, what happens if you just listen to a recording of this kind of essentially that person's daily social activity? If people have just heard that social activity and fill out the big five about you, and then we compare that with what they say about them and their friends say about them, can you judge what they're like? And what about what people look like? This was a study where people came into the lab. They didn't know it was a study about appearance. We took a photo of them and they filled out a personality survey. And then we showed these photos to other people and said, can you guess what this person's like purely on the basis of what they look like? All right, so I've shown you a lot of studies and I haven't given you very many results. I've only given you one set of results so far. I'm going to give you all of the results in terms of what I call a blob diagram, which is rather, you'll see why. So here we have the big five. You'll recognize there: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And we have the different studies we've talked about. We have the judging people on the basis of Facebook, their website, their bedroom, which is the study I've told you about already, their office, their music preferences, the social behavior, that was the one when they listened to snippets of their daily life, and physical appearance. And what I'm going to show you now is I'm going to show you the blobs, and the bigger the blob, the more accuracy there was. So what you see here is you see a couple of things. First, you see that generally some dimensions are more readable, more accurately judged than others. So for example, openness was generally accurately judged across domains. And then there's some other things you see is that some domains are more give you more information than others. So people's bedrooms and websites, those convey a lot of information compared to some of the other domains which have much less information. Music gives a lot about, for example, the openness, but not much about the other domains. So here you see that these different domains could essentially hold different information about different people. Now, what I've talked about so far is I've talked about, spaces that people, essentially you're given a space and then you decorate it. But what if you could start from scratch? This is a photo of Chris Travis. He is a architect that I've worked with, done quite a lot of work with. And what he does is he builds people's spaces starting from the psychology. So from ground up, it's not giving us like a dorm room or a living room or an office space and then seeing how people decorate it. He tries to build spaces to match the personalities of the people. And he goes very deeply into this. I could give, 2, 3, 4 talks all on his work. It's so interesting. But I just want to give you a very brief sense of what he's done and how we have tried to work with him on this. Now, here I am showing a photo of the Copenhagen Zoo because this is what you would hope people would do. So the Copenhagen Zoo was the elephant house was designed by Foster and Partners, and when they were building this place, what they did was they did exactly what you'd hope to do. They learned a lot about elephants. What are the elephants' different personalities? What are their moods? What do they do in the summer? What do they do in the winter? What do they do when they're in musth? And so on. And as a result, they built a very beautiful hotel. But when this same group, Foster and Partners, when they build a study for humans, they don't do the same. And it's like, to me, it seems so nuts that architects will put great um, uh, attention and energy into understanding the psychology of an elephant to build a beautiful house, but don't and use systematic experts to do that. But when they're doing it for humans, they kind of just intuit it, they make it up. So here is one of the plans of Christopher Travis's space. And you can see, if you look at the figures here, under master sleeping, it says tranquility heaven. Under Sarah's respite, it says rejuvenation of spirit. In the master bathroom, it says private and personal. So these are, you can see ambiances or atmospheres or emotions that Travis is trying to convey with these spaces. Here's another one. Here, the master bedroom says privacy, passion, and reflection. The master bath says rejuvenation. The kitchen says warmth and companionship. The pantry says abundance. So you can see right on the building plans, front and center, are the emotions, the atmospheres that they're trying to evoke. And what we did is we took Christopher Travis's procedures and we tried to make them more systematic and did a study of them saying, okay, if people could choose their ideal homes, which are the emotions that come up most often? And these are the ambiances that come up most often. So nearly everybody wants a space that's welcoming. Nearly everybody wants a place that reflects organization, reflection, and so on. But of course, the way these ambiances are spread around the space differs. So different people want different things. So if you look at people's master bedroom, the top five ambiances are romance, comfort, relaxation, love, and quiet across all people. But some people will, emphasize romance. Others will emphasize quiet. And of course, this pie diagram would look very different for another room. If you're looking at the kitchen or the garage, it would look completely different in terms of the top five emotions. And you can see they're distributed differently across the spaces. So for those people who want to evoke a sense of family, that's normally in the living room, the kitchen, the dining room, and the game room. Whereas when they're evoking a sense of relaxation, that's mainly in the living room and the guest bathroom and the master bathroom and the guest room. So that where people want to evoke these spaces differs. And I think this tells us a little bit about these thought and feeling regulators. That is, we try to build spaces to regulate our emotions. And we do that all the time by occupying different spaces. So we've done research on where people choose to sit in classrooms. So this is a study we did when I used to teach a very large class of 500 people in the class. And you can see the front and the back. And what we did here is we asked people to tell us where they were sitting. And what we noticed, of course, is that there were different personalities, different people with different personalities depended to sit in different locations of the class. So you will have guessed accurately that people high on conscientiousness, where do they sit? They tend to sit near the front. Of course they do. Now, what about those, something like neuroticism? Where would the neurotic people sit? Can you think about that? Well, it turns out that the neurotic people, remember, these are people who are sensitive to danger. They tend to sit on the edges of the rows and close to the doors. So our personalities reflects even where we put ourselves in space. And of course, there are other spaces too. Where is it that you tend to prefer to go? Do you like to go to Starbucks or do you tend to go to the kind of local independent cafe? People have strong preferences about this, and that in a sense reflects elements of your personality. We actually did a study looking at whether we can judge what a place is like merely by looking at the photos of the people who go there a lot. So this was a social media thing called Foursquare, where people who went to a place a lot would show their profile picture. So here we showed the profile pictures of people who went to various places and asked people to guess what the place was like purely on the basis of these profile photos. And what we found was that people are very accurate at judging just by looking at the profile photos of people who go to a place. What is the vibe of that place like? Is it artsy, bohemian, clean, conservative, etc.? What activities would be good to do at that place just by looking at the people who go there? Is it a good place for dancing, for reading, relaxing, studying, working, etc.? And what are the people like who go there? Are they extroverted, agreeable, conscientious, etc.? And what we did was, of course, we then sent a team to these places to see if they were accurate, and we found in general there was great accuracy, although there are of course details to this. Uh, so this takes us to, well, okay, if we move around in the area of the classroom and we move around into the different cafes we go to, is this also reflected in the geographical regions that we occupy? And these are the collaborators who I've been working on this research with. So we have stereotypes, don't we, about people from different regions. If you think of your stereotypical Californian, your stereotypical Southern Californian, and your stereotypical New Yorker, what do you think about, right? Maybe you think about the laid back, the taking it easy dude from the Big Lebowski in Southern California, and the uptight, neurotic, disagreeable people in the East Coast. Well, what we have done is we have collected literally millions. We have over 10 million questionnaires we've collected from the US. And we know their zip codes where they live. And that allows us to say, look at some of these dimensions. We can do essentially a heat map for these different personality dimensions. Is it true that people from the East Coast are more neurotic than people from the West Coast? Well, here is a heat map of neuroticism. And that essentially says, yes, the red areas show areas of higher than usual neuroticism. The blue areas show regions of lower than usual neuroticism. And you can see here that we do have these patterns. All right. And of course, we can then, once we have this information, we can also look at the personalities of cities. So let's take a look at New York. So this is consistent with our stereotype. They are high on neuroticism. They are high on openness. This is the red line we're looking at here, whereas they are low on agreeableness and low on conscientiousness. Contrast that with Memphis City, for example. That's the green line. You see those people are high on agreeableness, high on conscientiousness, moderate, they're about medium on neuroticism, but low on openness. So you can contrast these different personalities of cities. And of course, even broad areas, we know that even in fact, extroverts and introverts have different preferences just for general landscape. So for example, we know that we did a study of mountainousness, essentially looking at can we correlate personality traits to the types of rugged location that people live in. And we found that people who live in very steep areas, in mountainous areas, they reflect this kind of frontier person that's often characterized in our kind of the Marlboro Man ads. People who are introverted and resilient. They tend to live in these very steep areas, where more flat, open areas tend to be occupied more by people high on extroversion. I'll just talk about this study briefly. So, how do these personality dimensions get this way? Well, one theory was, well, what happens to create these dimensions? Well, one idea we had was, well, maybe it's these sort of major impacts that happen. So there's lots of data on how various cities in Germany, how much were they bombed during the Second World War? Can we relate how much a city was bombed during the Second World War to its present day neuroticism? And it turns out we can. It turns out the cities that were bombed a great deal tend to be lower on neuroticism than the cities that weren't bombed so much. And there's a very number of reasons we why that might be true, and I'd be happy to talk about them, but I'll do so in the Q&A if anybody's interested. I'm going to skip over this one. But one of the things that's interesting, I think, is once you have this data on neuroticism, you can relate it to other data at the state level. So this is the map of neuroticism, and this is the map of cancer-related deaths. And you can see they are strongly related. Now, I'm not saying neuroticism causes cancer or cancer causes neuroticism. Of course, this is just a correlation, but they are related strongly. So I think, I think I'll just skip across that one. I'm just going to end by talking about this slide again. I think, why is it that spaces are so revealing? And I think one of the reasons is essentially if you look at spaces and you look at our environment, they're a crystallization of many activities over a great deal of time. If you and I were to meet for a while and you wanted to create a false impression, you could probably do that. You could probably hold it together long enough to create a false impression. But it would be incredibly difficult for you to change these other aspects of the worlds in which you live, your music preferences, your social media profile, your actual office space, your home, where you live. And so that's why I think these spaces are so revealing about who we are and why they provide such insight into human personality. So with that, I'll end. If you want to learn more about it, you're welcome to read more in my book, Snoop, but I think I want to leave enough time for questions in case anybody has any. So I will stop there.
So we do have some questions that have been submitted. The first one, does research show different findings in different countries? Is there a bias based on your country?
Yeah, so we've actually done a lot of research looking at different countries. So for example, we did research looking at how much is present day things like neuroticism associated with industrial activities during the Industrial Revolution. And we find that and we replicate these same patterns, whether it is in America, we did the same pattern in Germany, and we find the same patterns in the UK. And you also do see differences between countries in many of these dimensions, of course. Though it becomes trickier, especially when you're using translated personality instruments in different languages, because a very small shift in if we take the word for talkative in English and Spanish and Dutch and German, they might be slightly different nuances in those which cause people to respond slightly differently. So once you get into these kind of cross-cultural comparisons, it gets complex. But the answer is yes, we do find differences within other countries and cross countries too. I can't hear what you say.
Apologies, I hit that mute button. Are there substantial differences between males and females when it comes to organization and cleanliness in personal spaces? Is that something else seen?
There are some differences, and not only are there differences, there are differences across age, and I think that anyone who has met a teenager's bedroom will know, right, is that these things change. And what's kind of interesting, of course, is that these changes match very well, the growth in frontal lobes in our brain structure. So you do see some differences with females tending to be, on average, more organized and so on.
Excellent. I'm glad we've recorded this. This is great. So what do the geometric shapes we live in say about us? We live in squares, triangles, circles.
Yeah. Well, I think what they say is how pitiful architecture has been at incorporating what it is that humans like. So, if you look at places that are made not by architects but are made by just people, but pre-architecture, just by builders and so on, they're often much more round in shape. They're not so regimented in their patterns and so on. So a lot of the shape of the spaces has to do with building, the ease of building and the efficiencies of building, and so on. But there's been a bunch of research done by neuroscientists looking at preferences for things like curvature, things like ceiling height, and so on. And I think, it's incredibly important because the spaces are important for how we feel, our sense of relaxation, our sense of safety, um, uh, our creativity, um, how rejuvenating a space is. It turns out spaces are really important, and I think there's a growing movement in a small subset of researchers and architects working together to try to do the research so that architects can take in these preferences to try to make better spaces. Spaces are really important, and it seems to me absolutely crazy that you can go through architecture school without doing any classes on psychology. What I mean, would where else would you be asked to, you know, create spaces for some kind of creature, whether it's a human or cows, without being systematically taught about what cows are like. And and I think, they think, well, I'm a human, so I can intuit it. The architect says, I'm a human, I know what it's like to be a human. But it turns out, right, that in fact, that the architects are the exact wrong people to be using their intuition, because if you look at the spaces that architects like, the spaces they like correlates negatively with what everybody else likes. So they are almost by definition the least qualified people to be using their intuition. And who knows if their intuition is right? We know from years of psychology, our intuition about all kinds of things is wrong. Why we do things. Why, if I might ask people, how do you recognize a grammatical sentence, or whether somebody is a male or a female or something like that? We may come up with all kinds of explanations, but we're almost certainly wrong about what it is we're doing. We're very good about coming up with these theories. So, so and the spaces are way too important just to be kind of making it up. If and there's nothing that will get two architects more animated than talking about what a third architect did wrong and how they would all do it, how they would do it differently. And that just shows you, like, if there was a objective answer, they wouldn't all be doing it different ways, right? And I think part of the problem, I'm going beyond the question here, though. I think part of the problem is that, and I understand it, is that as an architect, you are selected and socialized to be an artist. And that's so it's understandable that people kind of treat their buildings as an opportunity to make an artistic statement. But that's really messed up, because what's really important is the people who live in these spaces. Are they healthy? Are they not lonely? Are they not depressed? Are they productive? Can they relax? I think the world would be a much better place if if the people who were going into architecture were people who were thinking, okay, shall I be like a doctor or a nurse or a social worker or an architect? That is not there to aggrandize themselves by building works of art, but trying to make the world a better place, using knowledge to help people. And because the spaces we're in are important, and the function, it's not just does it look great and does it keep out the weather and does it stand up? It's also, does it serve the functions as backed up by science? Does it serve the functions of the individuals who live there? Sorry, I went way too far, but with that question.
Very interesting, though. One question we have, and I think this will be our last question, but it's been asked about 4 or 5 times
Okay.
over here in the Q&A. Are there more resources you could provide that talk about the areas that were heavily bombed in World War II and that link with neuroticism? You mentioned people are fascinated by that, and I think would love more info.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, probably the easiest thing to do is you can read my paper. We have a paper written on it, and it's accessible. So if you can't get hold of it, you can go to the website called ResearchGate, and there you can request the paper, and I'll send it to you. Um, yeah, the findings were the opposite to what we expected. We thought the cities that had been bombed would be more neurotic, but in fact, it turns out, and I think if you now, of course, you can make sense of it because, like, when if a city is getting bombed, right, the first people to leave it are the neurotic people, which makes sense. It's reasonable to leave that. And so I think that leaves these traces. We've found, we've I do think this kind of, how these cities start off getting their traits is a fascinating area. Some of the research we've just hopefully coming out soon. We've been trying to publish it for years, but it's looking at the gold rush and how you could actually judge the personalities, especially on the west in the gold rush areas in California and the West Coast. You can judge the current day openness to experience is a function of how close to a gold find there was in the 1840s and 1850s. So there's all these different dimensions, it's like, and that makes sense. Who is it? Who is it who decides to leave, the UK or leave the East Coast and go to California in search of gold? It's a very special type of person who goes, and that kind of the vestige of those people remains in these geographic differences that we see today.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gosling. This was honestly fascinating. I think you've generated a lot of interest in this. And as a note to everyone, we will be sending out an email that will include the recording of this presentation so you can go back and find some of these little nuggets that you wanted to investigate further there. So thanks everyone for joining us. Our lunchtime lecture series will continue in 2026. Be sure to keep an eye out on your email for the full spring schedule, which will be shared later this year. We hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you again in the new year.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone. Feel free to write or check out my work, and I'm happy to send it to you. Thank you for having me.